Welcome to Regular Folks, where you get to see how petty, spiteful, or even annoying people can be, sometimes for absolutely no reason. How a barking dog complaint sparked a 15-foot wall of suburban revenge. In the peaceful suburbs of Greenville County, South Carolina, where manicured lawns meet quiet cul-de-sacs and neighbors wave politely over white picket fences, an extraordinary tale of suburban warfare unfolded in 2012. It's a story that would captivate local news outlets, spark heated social media debates, and ultimately become a cautionary tale about how quickly neighborly disputes can escalate from minor annoyances to towering monuments of spite. At the center of this drama stood two men: Dustin Earnhardt, a newcomer to the neighborhood who simply wanted a peaceful night's sleep, and Carl Kurtz, a longtime resident whose solution to conflict would forever alter the skyline of their quiet street on Britain Way. Between them would rise a 15-foot barrier that transformed a routine noise complaint into one of the most notorious spite fence cases in recent American suburban history. When Dustin Earnhardt and his wife purchased their home in 2011, they embodied the classic American dream of home ownership. Their house featured a beautiful sunroom at the back, designed to capture natural light and provide a serene space for relaxation and entertainment. The room's large windows offered pleasant views of the surrounding neighborhood, creating an atmosphere that Dustin described as having genuine ambiance. The Earnhardts had chosen their home carefully, drawn to what appeared to be a quiet, family-friendly neighborhood where they could build their future. Like millions of Americans before them, they invested their savings and emotions into creating a haven where they could retreat from the stresses of daily life. However, the tranquility they sought would prove elusive. Their neighbor, Carl Kurtz, owned dogs that had developed a habit of barking throughout the night. For the Earnhardts, who worked traditional daytime jobs and needed rest, this nocturnal cacophony became an increasingly serious problem that affected their quality of life and well-being. The initial approach taken by the Earnhardts and several other affected neighbors was entirely reasonable and followed conventional conflict resolution protocols. Rather than confronting Kurtz directly, which might have led to immediate hostility, they followed proper legal channels by contacting Greenville County Animal Control. The first complaint was filed in August 2011, just months after the Earnhardts had moved into their new home. When the barking continued, they filed a second complaint in January 2012, this time joined by other neighbors who were similarly affected by the nighttime disturbances. These weren't frivolous complaints from unreasonable people. They represented legitimate concerns about noise pollution. From Kurtz's perspective, however, these complaints represented an attack on his lifestyle and property rights. As a salesman who preferred face-to-face communication, he felt blindsided by the formal complaints rather than direct conversation. When animal control officers visited his property twice, he experienced what he later described as being taken aback by the official intervention. This fundamental difference in communication styles, the Earnhardt's preference for official channels versus Kurtz's desire for direct neighbor-to-neighbor discussion, would prove to be the fatal flaw that prevented any reasonable resolution of their dispute. Carl Kurtz's response to the animal control complaints was swift, dramatic, and utterly disproportionate to the original problem. Rather than addressing the barking issue through training, behavioral modification, or simply bringing his dogs inside during nighttime hours, he chose a path that would permanently alter the relationship between neighbors and transform the physical landscape of their community. The fence that began rising in early 2012 was no ordinary privacy barrier. At 15 feet in height, it towered above standard residential fencing by more than double the typical 6-foot suburban standard. The structure wasn't just tall, it was positioned specifically to maximize its impact on the Earnhardt property, completely blocking the view from their prized sunroom and casting shadows across their backyard. The construction itself sent a clear message about Kurtz's intentions. This wasn't a fence designed for aesthetic appeal or reasonable privacy. It was a monument to anger, built with the specific purpose of punishing his neighbors for their complaints about his dogs. In legal terms, this met the precise definition of a spite fence, a structure erected maliciously for the primary purpose of annoying adjacent property owners. The immediate effects of Kurtz's fence on the Earnhardt family were profound and multifaceted. The most obvious impact was the complete transformation of their sunroom from a bright, welcoming space into what Dustin described as a practically useless room. The towering barrier blocked natural light that had previously made the space livable and enjoyable, fundamentally altering the character of their home. The financial implications were equally serious. In real estate, views and natural light are major factors in property valuation. The presence of a massive, unsightly barrier directly adjacent to their home would inevitably affect their property's market value, representing a concrete financial loss imposed unilaterally by their neighbors' actions. Carl Kurtz's public statements about his fence revealed a man who felt entirely justified in his actions. His primary stated motivation was privacy, a desire to prevent neighbours from looking in our yard and taking tabs on what we are doing. However, Kurtz's solution revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of both reasonable privacy measures and community standards. While privacy is indeed a legitimate concern, the extreme nature of Kurtz's response suggested that privacy wasn't his only, or perhaps even primary motivation. His own statements about feeling taken aback by the animal control visits indicated that the fence served as much as retaliation as privacy protection. The structure became a physical manifestation of his anger about the complaints, rather than a reasonable solution to legitimate privacy concerns. When WIFF News 4, the local NBC affiliate, picked up the story in 2012, it quickly became a sensation that captured public attention far beyond Greenville County. The visual impact of a 15-foot fence towering over a residential neighborhood provided perfect television content. The media coverage revealed sharply divided public opinion about the fence and the broader principles at stake. Some viewers expressed sympathy for Kurtz's desire for privacy and his right to use his property as he saw fit. They argued that property ownership should include the freedom to build reasonable structures without interference from neighbours or government, viewing the fence as an exercise of legitimate property rights. Others sided strongly with the Earnhardts, seeing the fence as an example of selfish disregard for community standards and neighbourly consideration. They argued that property rights, while important, should not include the ability to inflict harm on adjacent properties through clearly malicious construction. The story's social media spread brought it to national attention, with discussion threads and comment sections revealing the deep cultural divisions around issues of property rights, community standards, and conflict resolution. The case became a kind of Rorschach test for broader American attitudes about individual rights versus collective responsibility. The Greenville County case contributed to ongoing discussions about spike fence legislation and property rights in South Carolina and other states without specific statutory protections. The rise of social media has given contemporary spike fence cases much broader reach and impact than historical disputes. Stories like the Earnhardt-Kurtz fence war can now become viral sensations that influence public opinion and potentially legislative action far beyond their original communities. More than a decade after its construction, Carl Kurtz's 15-foot fence stands as a monument to the costs of unresolved conflict. For Dustin Earnhardt and his family, the fence serves as a daily reminder that their investment in suburban peace and community was vulnerable to the actions of a single angry neighbour. Perhaps most tragically, both men's original concerns were legitimate and could have been addressed through reasonable compromise. Kurtz's dogs could have been managed through training or schedule changes, and his privacy concerns could have been met with reasonable fencing. The Earnhardts' desire for peaceful enjoyment of their property was entirely justified and could have been respected without sacrificing Kurtz's legitimate interests.